Welcome to No Rares Required, Episode 12, Gruul Oil Beatdown. Every week I discuss a drafting strategy for a different archetype, and today we'll be covering my drafting strategy for Gruul, or Red-Green in Phyrexia All Will Be One. The set has been out for 1 week, but Gruul has been the early superstar. It is also the most drafted archetype by quite a bit, so it may be overdrafted here soon, if it isn't already. The archetype's theme is oil synergies, used to beat down your opponent, and if you haven't had a chance to draft it yet, let me tell you, the set is fast. I have found it to be very difficult to come back if you fall behind, and keeping a turn 3 play on the draw has usually been a death sentence. My one and only Tier 1 top common for Gruul is Contagious Vorak. It is one of the top performing commons in the set, and it is best in Gruul. It's a 3/3 for 3 that digs through 4 cards to find land, not just a basic one either, and puts it into your hand. If you happen to miss or don't need the land, you can decline to trigger a Proliferate. The Proliferate has been nice in decks looking to win through poison counters, but Gruul isn't trying to do that. The land draw is what makes this card so important in Gruul, since you're really looking to curve out and play some good mid-range threats. But do keep the Proliferate in mind if you have a bunch of cards on the battlefield with oil synergies. My Tier 2 commons start with Hexgold Slash. These are still commons that I want as many as I can get. Gruul is going for a mid-range strategy, but keep in mind that the set is really fast. So we're aiming to play early blockers, especially ones that help us ramp into our mid-range threats, and then cards that help us push the damage through. Hexgold Slash helps us survive until we can get to our bigger threats by being premium removal. And then if we draw it later in the game, it can help us outvalue our opponent by trading way up if we are able to hit a toxic creature with 4 health, which there are several in the set. There are also a fair amount of cheap combat tricks, so I found this to be pretty easy to 2 for 1 with this card. I completely misjudged this card, but now that I've had a chance to play the set, I've really warmed up to it. My next Tier 2 common is Hazardous Blast. There aren't a whole lot of evasive creatures in red or green, so sometimes the board stalls, especially since there are some death touch creatures in the set. This card lets you get through your opponent's defenses and swing for lethal. Also of note, if they play a flash creature into play like Chrome Prowler, for example, they still can't block with it. It also deals 1 damage to each creature that your opponent controls, which can be really nice against the white decks and all of their 1/1 might tokens. It's still a little early to say exactly how many I want to play in my deck. I think that I found like 2 has felt pretty good. The card does not help you take back the board if you're behind, and you really need it as just a finisher. So I still will be taking these pretty highly for the time being, but I think 2 or 3 is where you want to be. My last Tier 2 common is Chimney Rabble. This one also I had a lower on my tier list than it deserved. Unlike Hazardous Blast, which I put as situational filler, at least I had this one as filler. Playing a 4/4 worth of value for 4 is great in Limited, and the 3/3 has haste. I had put this as a Rakdos card, where it's currently performing slightly better, but there are a fair amount of creatures in the set, around 25 if I remember correctly, that only have 1 HP, so the 1/1 can trade instead of just being used to chump a big attacker. White also has a go wide strategy with its toxic mites, and I found that the 1/1 blocker can be very useful. What I'm getting at is this card performs well in every red archetype, not just Gruul. This is another card that I want to pick up highly, but at 4 cost, I'm still trying to figure out how many I want in my deck. I do feel like Gruul has been going for a bit larger of a curve than some archetypes, and I found myself wanting the standard 17 lands. So for the time being, I'm looking for 4-ish 4-drops, and I want this to be one of them, if not in multiples. The other thing to note is that both of your rampers are aiming to give you 4 mana on turn 3. So I've found my turn 3 tends to be a little bit lower, and then my turn 4 tends to be a little bit higher in this archetype. Axiom Engraver is also one that I undervalued. I had it as situational filler, but it has been performing quite well in Gruul. Now that the set's been out for a week, I put it at tier 3. The set is fast, and this has made an excellent 2-drop. It comes into play with 2 oil counters on it, so it fits nicely into the oil synergies in Gruul, and can help you smooth out your early plays or draws, which I'll emphasize again, if you stumble, it is nearly impossible to come back in this set. Unlike Chimney Rabble, which has been great in every red deck, this one needs to be in a deck centered around oil, so Gruul and Izzet for red. At tier 3, I'm not looking to go out of my way for this, but it does make the cut, and it is better than filler. My next tier 3 common is Lattice Blade Mantis. This one I also think you need to be in an archetype that cares about oil, which for green is Gruul and maybe Simic. I'm still trying to figure out what Simic is doing. Anyway, Lattice Blade Mantis comes into play with 2 oil counters on it, and when you attack you can remove one to make it a 5/4 with pseudo vigilance. Being able to attack and still leave this up on defense has been nice against decks that are trying to sneak poison counters through, which have a hard time with the 5/4 stat block. This card is nice too if you have oil synergies and can keep it fueled up. Ruthless Predation is my next tier 3 common. It has the problems that most fight spells have, which is that it's sorcery speed, and you can be 2-for-1'd by your opponent's removal. So you want to be a little bit careful about when you play it, but it's decent removal at the common level, and it's a decent replacement if you can't find any Hexgold slashes. My last tier 3 common for Gruul is Rustvine Cultivator, another card that I underestimated. It's a good early blocker against the 1/1s that are trying to push early Toxic for Corrupted, and it has oil synergies. I'm not sure I want to play it outside of Gruul, but in Gruul I'm interested in ramping to some of my very powerful mid-range uncommons and rares that we're about to get into. It's also helpful that this can count as a permanent with an oil counter once you've tapped it, because this archetype does care about how many permanents you have that have oil. This one is a little tricky to figure out how to adjust your mana base, but my gut says that I'll be treating these as half lands and dropping a land for every 2 that I have in the deck or something like that. It is worth noting that this is strictly a ramper, not a mana dork that can give you a color you don't have. So whether to run fewer lands will have more to do with the overall curve of the deck, instead of how many Rustvine Cultivators you decide to run. I was hesitant to agree that Evolving Adaptive was going to be a mythic level uncommon, and it turns out people were right. This thing is great, and I begrudgingly admit I was wrong to be skeptical, and I give it its tier S. It comes into play with an oil counter on it, so it works for oil synergies. Then it gets +1/+1 for each oil counter on it. It grows each time a creature comes into play with power or toughness greater than Evolving Adaptive's power or toughness, so it's not hard to get this up to 3/3 or 4/4. And this combos pretty well with Free From Flesh, the 1-cost red instant that gives a creature +2/+2 until end of turn, and 2 permanent oil counters. So for this guy, that's a +4/+4 and a permanent +2/+2. Not bad. Definitely take as many of these as you can. My other tier S uncommon for Gruul is Cinderslash Ravager. I thought splashing was going to be more of a thing in this set, and I definitely had my eyes on this card to see if it would end up in other archetypes. So far, not yet. The aggressive nature of the set has made splashing difficult, even though the set has decent fixing. Cinderslash Ravager is a great example of what I mean by oil synergies, and why Gruul cares about how many permanents have oil counters. This thing gets 1 cheaper for each permanent that you have with an oil counter, so you can get this down for 2 or 3 mana pretty easily, which can be hugely devastating on your opponent. It also deals 1 damage to each creature they control, which once again destroys white and its 1/1 might tokens. Then it's a 5/5 vigilance, which is a great stat block. This is another card that I will take as many as I'm offered. Rebel Salvo is my first tier 1 uncommon for Gruul. You may even have some cheap equipment synergies like Barbed Batterfist as filler in your deck to make this cheaper. But even if you have to cast it at full cost, dealing 5 damage for 3 at instant speed is great. This is the best removal in red, and you should look to take as many as you can get. Armored Scrapgorger is my next tier 1 uncommon for Gruul. I was really excited for this card because I thought splashing for busted gold cards was going to be very important. As I mentioned, it has been difficult to splash due to the pace of the set, but this still works to ramp along with your Rustvine Cultivators to ramp to 4 mana on turn 3. And every time you tap it, it gets an oil counter. So it works for the oil synergies in the deck as well. Then, when it has 3 or more oil, it becomes a 3/3. It also has a little bit of graveyard hate. Recursion strategies or utilizing a graveyard haven't been very important because, once again, the set is really fast. But this hitting something like Viral Spawning, the green flashback card that needs Corrupted, can be very nice. My last Tier 1 uncommon for Gruul is Kinkerbloom. This card plays well in every green deck because there are a fair amount of good artifact targets in the set. And if your opponent happens to not have any, this still plays as a more powerful Grizzly Bear as a 3/2 for 3. It also has the ability to proliferate, which I can't imagine has come up very much in this archetype, but you never know. Maybe you really need those oil counters. My first Tier 2 uncommon is Hexgold Halberd. The fact that this only has First Strike and Trample when it's your turn brings down the value a little bit, but it's still a Grizzly Bear that leaves behind an equipment when it dies. I think the real dream with this is to equip a large Death Touch creature, but it works pretty well with the Lattice Blade Mantis or some of your other mid-range beef that can benefit from gaining Trample. Looking at you, Cinderslash Ravager. Incubation Sac is a Tier 2 uncommon if you are in an oil-based strategy. Being able to increase your number of permanents with oil can be very important, and this does that quite cheaply. Then later in the game, this can produce 3 3/3s, and that's if you can't give it any more oil. That's a fair amount of value out of one card, and is a good way to build your board while it's stalled, and you're waiting to draw for your Hazardous Blast. Atraxa's Skitterfang is my last Tier 2 uncommon for Gruul. I think this is going to be the Scrapwork Mutt of the set. It's colorless, and its abilities are pretty useful in every archetype. It's especially nice in an oil-based deck where you can use its ability every turn and not run out of oil counters. I still have a quest to give a big Trampler Death Touch with this card, and it will happen. It's just a matter of time. Now for my Tier 3 uncommons. These are uncommons that are better than filler, but I don't want as many as I can grab, or they're dependent on having other cards to synergize with. Exuberant Fuseling is a 1/1 for 1 that comes into play with an oil counter on it and gets +1/+0 each time a creature or artifact you control is put into a graveyard. I thought this was going to have nice synergies with the Skull Bombs, but the set is unforgiving to taking a turn off from playing a creature, so the Skull Bombs have turned out to be mostly duds. It's really important to be aiming to do something from turn 1 in this set, and this is a nice creature for the 1 slot. Urabrask's Anointer is my next Tier 3 uncommon. By turn 4, it's not uncommon for this to deal 2 or 3 damage to a target, and then you have 4 power, so it can trade up in value. This card goes down in value if you haven't managed to pick up a lot of oil synergies. And once again, we have a 4-cost card, and I think that there are better options that you can ramp to. But if you don't have anything else, then this is better than filler. Infectious Bite is my next Tier 3 uncommon. It's decent removal, and at least it's instant speed. The poison counter isn't very important since Gruul is focusing on oil instead of toxic, and if they blow up your creature, this can be prone for 2-1, so try to play around your opponent's removal if you can. This is also a dud if your board is empty, but makes a decent replacement if you haven't found any Rebel salvos. I was on the fence about Sylvok Battle Chair and whether or not a Colossal Dread Mob would play in this set. So far it looks okay in Gruul and filler in other archetypes. You definitely want to be careful with how much top end you put in your deck, especially when the format is fast. But then again, we do want things to ramp to. So you want something, and this can definitely be that something. A 6/6 Trampler for 6 isn't bad top end, and then if it leaves the battlefield, you get an equipment that can make your next creature into a big trampler for the cost of 7 mana. I think you only want one card that costs 6 or 7 since you want to maintain a low curve, but this definitely can get the job done if you haven't found a better option. My last tier 3 uncommon is Tyvar's Stand. I've been pretty impressed with this card, but I think you only want 1 or 2 since playing your creature every turn is very important. It lets you deal X damage and plays as a green blaze if a single creature goes unblocked. You can also choose X to be 0 and play it as a safekeeping from Neon Dynasty, except for no life gain, to save a bomb from removal. It also performs very well in every green archetype, so I'll be taking these early and not just when I find myself in Gruul. Now for the rares. I haven't had the opportunity to slam Migloz Maze Crusher yet, but I'm looking forward to it. This card is definitely S tier in Gruul. It's a 4/4 for 3 that comes into play with 5 oil counters on it. You can tap 1 and remove 1 oil counter to give it Vigilance and Menace, 2 and 2 oil counters for +2/+2, and 3 and 3 oil to destroy an artifact or enchantment. This card really applies the pressure, and the more oil you've got to put on it, the better. My first tier 1 rare for Gruul is Dragonwing Glider. This card plays very similarly to the Battle Chair, but it's cheaper and has evasion. A 4/4 flying haste for 5 is great, and then being able to pay 5 to make another big flyer is a lot for your opponent to answer. The set also feels weak to flyers. There is the Incisor Glider, the 1/3 white flyer for 2, and Gitaxian Raptor, the 1/4 blue flyer for 3. Those are the most common flyers that I've bumped into, and this card gets through both of them easily. My second tier 1 rare for Gruul is Urabrask's Forge. Gruul wants oil synergies, and this is a great payoff for playing with oil. For each oil counter, this puts on a counter every turn. It creates a X1 trample haste token, where X is the number of oil counters on the Forge. The tokens have to be sacked at the end of the turn, but they just keep coming every turn, slowly growing larger until you eventually overrun your opponent's defenses. And this is good because this card gives you a little bit of inevitability, which Gruul can kind of struggle with and end up being stalled out. My last tier 1 rare is Thrun, Breaker of Silence. Another one that I haven't had the privilege to slam personally, but I am looking forward to it. It can't be countered, which matters because the Quench, Bring the Ending, countered my beautiful White Sun's Twilight. Feel free to check out the video if you want to see me in shambles. I'll try to remember to include the link in the top right. Thrun is a 5/5 trample for 5 that can't be targeted by non-green spells your opponents control. So they can't just answer this with an Anoint with Affliction or Rebel Salvo. And if it's your turn, Thrun has Indestructible. This is definitely a great card to make up the top end of your Gruul deck. Now for my tier 2 rares. These are rares that might be more specific to Gruul or better in a different archetype, but they generally lack enough power to just win you the game when you play them. My first tier 2 rare is Evolved Spinoderm. This is one that I really only want to play in Gruul, and it fits nicely into the oil strategy. It's a 5/5 for 4 that comes in with 4 oil counters on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, you remove an oil counter, and if you can't, you sacrifice it. Very much the new Blastoderm from days gone by. It has hexproof until it has 2 or fewer oil counters, when it then gains Trample. A great card to ramp to on turn 3 indeed. Bloated Contaminator is my second tier 2 rare. It's a little bit better in Celestia and Golgari, where there's more of a poison theme going on since itself has Toxic 1. But a 4/4 for 3 with Trample is great in a mid-range beatdown deck. And the Proliferate can hit your oil counters. I've just found that you don't need Proliferate with oil as much as you do with Toxic. Koth, Fire of Resistance, is a great rare in Gruul. It's a little bit better in Izzet, where you have some card draw to really try and hit a mountain every turn once you have the emblem. And since I think blue is best as a support color, I tend to be more red heavy in Izzet than I do in Gruul, where I can be a little bit closer to 50-50. Especially because Rootvine Cultivator is a center stone to my strategy. I tend to run at least 9 forests in Gruul, but I'm definitely not going to pass them up. My last tier 3 rare is Argentum Masticore. One quick note, I'm sure I forgot to mention a rare or mythic, but these are the ones that came to mind. If there's one that really deserves to be on the list, I'll add it as a comment below. Argentum Masticore is a rare that really needs card draw to shine, but this set demands that you play a creature or removal almost every turn, so card draw is hard to get to work. But in a set that wants to play a creature or removal every turn, how about a card that's both? And this thing is a great thing to ramp to, since it's better the more cards that you have in hand. Now for the mythics. Nissa, Ascended Animist, is definitely my #1 tier S mythic for Gruul. If you get to play her for her full cost, instead of paying life to pay the Phyrexian mana, she can immediately ultimate, giving all your creatures +X in trample, where X is the number of forests you control. And like I mentioned, I tend to be mostly green, at least in my mana base, because of Rootvine Cultivator. And if you do have to pay life to get her out, she's still great because she can spit out 4/4s or 6/6s every turn, and we all know a planeswalker that can block for themselves is where it's at. Hey look, more busted planeswalkers! Luca, Bound to Ruin, is mint for Gruul. Being able to immediately ultimate seems to be a thing in Phyrexia All Will Be One, and Gruul tends to have some big creatures in play. Luca can also create 3/3s every turn or help you ramp to your big creatures. All around, very impressive and definitely also S tier. Now there's quite a leap to my next mythics, all the way down to tier 3. These are mythics I'll definitely play if I'm in Gruul, but they don't immediately draw me to Gruul if I open them up, pack one, pick one. Solphim Mayhem Dominus is pretty decent as a 5/4 for 4 that makes all of your removal hit for double. The discarding 2 cards is a pretty brutal price for Indestructible, but if he's going to win you the game, then go for that Hellbent. Another tier 3 mythic is Tyrannix Rex. The mana cost is really what is preventing this thing from being a higher tier. It costs 7, but it can't be countered, and it gives you a 8/8 trample, ward 4, haste, toxic 4 creature. So if you can't get there, if you can get there and pay this 7 cost, it usually wins you the game. Last but not least, we have Zopandrel Hunger Dominus. Once again, 7 mana cost, but it comes in as a 4/6 reach that at the beginning of combat, it doubles the power and toughness of each creature you control until end of turn. I really want to sacrifice 2 mites to give this Indestructible, but the game is usually over pretty quick in the Celestia archetype. So, thank you for enjoying my simple guide to Gruul. I just got a trophy with Gruul uncommons and commons, so no rares required. So look for my Gruul no rares required draft, which should be posted this Friday the 17th. Also, please take a moment to hit like and subscribe. It really helps me out. I've been enjoying Phyrexia All Will Be One, and we're just starting to scratch the surface of what the set is all about. If there's an archetype that you want to see next, let me know in the comments below. And once again, thank you all for the support, and I'll see you next week.